Baby Ben Gregg is all grown up now, and we celebrate his Gonzaga career and discuss how the Zags are going to replace him.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Randy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet is a win. Folks, today is our Ben Gregg season in review episode. We're going to talk about his history, how he ended up in Spokane, his most recent season. We're going to talk about the highs and lows from Ben Gregg. We're also going to talk about his legacy in Spokane, his future, what that might look like professionally, and how Gonzaga is going to replace him on next year's roster. Then we're going to close out the show talking about Yvonne Ejim getting selected by the Indiana Fever in the WNBA draft, what that means for her, Gonzaga's history in the WNBA draft. We'll also talk about Bree Salenbien finding a new home in the transfer portal, what that means for the Zag women's team as well. But we're starting the show talking Ben Gregg here as part of our season in review episode. We're about halfway through these, taking a little longer, as of course we've been very up to date on everything going on in the transfer portal, but hoping to knock out a few more of these this week and get close to being done so we can turn our attention fully to the offseason and the upcoming season. Ben Gregg, 6'8" forward from Clackamas, Oregon, out of high school. He dreamed of playing at Gonzaga. He has family located in Spokane, including his grandma. And there's tons of pictures of him. If you followed his father, Matt Gregg, on social media, pretty much every game day, he would post a new picture of Ben Gregg, often labeling him Baby Ben Gregg, hence the reference at the beginning of the show. There's tons of pictures of Ben in particular as a kid rooting for Gonzaga while at UP games when Gonzaga would come to the Child Center to face Portland. Of course, Ben playing in Clackamas High School nearby. So you could tell that Ben has been a fan of this program since he was a kid. Like, we had a ton of evidence of that being very true. It hurt me deeply to see pictures of baby Ben Gregg, or at least like young teenager Ben Gregg, even younger than that, like a 9 or 10-year-old. And I'm like, oh, that's the season that I was probably also at that game as a college student. It's, one of those things that happens, but nice to see Ben, somebody who's such a dedicated fan of the program, get the chance to play at Gonzaga. The Zags made him a scholarship offer on August 27th, 2020. So shortly after Paolo Banchero, who they'd been pursuing, ultimately decided to go to Duke. Gonzaga makes an offer to Ben Gregg. Ben commits to Gonzaga very shortly after that. On his grandmother's birthday, September 9th, 2020, was when he made the announcement that he was coming to Gonzaga for the 21-22 season. However, Ben actually ended up in Spokane with the Zags a half season early. He joined Gonzaga in the second semester of the 2020-21 season, even though he was still technically supposed to be a high school senior. This happened because of the COVID-19. The high school season in Oregon had been canceled. Ben was able to graduate a semester early from Clackamas High School. The NCAA put down a rule because so many high school seasons were canceled that year. The NCAA said, if you graduate, you can start early. Like, you can start at your school early. Obviously, from an academic perspective, you're allowed to do that. And so they said, if you're academically qualified, you can start, you can play right away. It won't count against your eligibility because that entire season did not count against folks' eligibility. So for Ben Gregg, he gets the opportunity to play in 18 games, to play 55 total minutes for Gonzaga during the 2020-21 season. He scored 17 points. He had 18 rebounds. All of this happened when he should have still been in high school. Not only was he not in high school anymore, he was on a national championship team, a team that went to the national championship. He played in that game. He got opportunities very rarely afforded to people who are still in high school. It was extremely cool that Ben got that opportunity. Obviously, the entirety of COVID was not cool, but these kind of things did happen for a lot of players. And I thought it was a cool opportunity for Ben to get this chance. And then as a true freshman, his quote-unquote actual freshman year came in 21-22, and his playing time wasn't really much different than it was in his fake freshman year, because he was still behind Drew Timme, he was still behind Chet Holmgren, he was behind Anton Watson. He only appeared in 17 games that year, played 6.5 minutes per game, averaged 2.5 points and 2 boards. But then we saw him blossom into a bigger role as a sophomore in the 22-23 season. He appeared in 36 games for Gonzaga that year, played about 12 minutes a game, so doubled up the minutes per game. 5 points, 3 boards. This is the first of 2 consecutive seasons where Ben shot 37.7% from 3. And this was the year where Ben, early in the year, it still wasn't clear exactly what his role was going to look like, but he definitively passed Efton Reed in his lone season at Gonzaga. He passed Efton Reed on the depth chart during the Phil Knight Invitational, the PK 85, when Gonzaga played Purdue in particular. Ben just came off the bench, gave Gonzaga some great energy, hit some outside shots, defended Zach Edey as well as anybody is really expected to defend Zach Edey at the college level. And from that point on, Ben was the third big for Gonzaga. He carved out a significant role. Like you said, 36 games, 12 minutes per night. That's him playing every single game consistently, first and second half minutes. It was a direct result, or directly resulted in Efton Reed hitting the transfer portal at the end of the season, but it cemented Ben Gregg's place in Gonzaga's rotation, in Gonzaga's development system going forward. And the next year, we saw even more growth. This was the 2023-24 season. Ben played 35 games, started 19 of them, played about 23 and a half minutes per game. This was the best season of Ben's college basketball career. He averaged 9 points, 5.7 boards, 1.2 assists, 1.2 steals, also shot 37.7% from 3. Like I said, 2 straight years where that happened. This is the year where Ben Gregg began the season coming off the bench because Dusty Stromer was thrust into a starting role following the injury to Steel Venters just a few games before the season began. You had Anton Watson starting, Graham Ike starting for that team, and Ben coming off the bench. But then Gonzaga made an adjustment halfway through the year, started bringing Dusty off the bench, had Ben starting, Watson and Ben kind of both playing this 3-4 hybrid role where Watson was kind of playing the 3 defensively and Ben was kind of playing the 3 offensively. It didn't seem like it should work, but it totally worked because Ben was shooting the 3 ball well that year. Anton was also shooting the 3 ball well that year. Both guys are versatile in the skill sets that they provided. When Ben did step into the starting lineup for Dusty in his first game, I think he had 23 points. It was against San Diego. Just immediately gave Gonzaga like a jolt of energy in mid-January when they really needed it, and kind of helped catapult that team to that big win over Kentucky in February, the big finish to the end of the season, getting the 5 seed, ultimately beating Kansas and making it back to the Sweet 16. This past year actually looked very similar for Ben. 35 games, 20 starts. Last year was 19, so started 1 more game. He only played 19.9 minutes per game, so a little bit of a drop from the 23 and a half he played as a junior. He averaged 9.1 points, so career high barely. But then he averaged 5 boards, 1.3 assists, 0.7 steals. He shot a blistering hot 72.9% on 2-pointers. Nearly 3/4 of his 2-point attempts last year went in. That is insane levels of efficiency. He not only led the WCC in 2-point field goal percentage, he was 10th nationally in all of college basketball in 2-point field goal percentage last year. One of the most efficient low post scorers in the country. Obviously, he did not have the volume that players like Graham Ike or, looking at other teams, Hunter Dickinson, Trey Kaufman-Renn, et cetera, had, but still to score 73% of the time on 2-pointers is otherworldly good. However, Ben's 3-point shooting plummeted to 27.1%. That was a huge problem for not only Ben this last year, but for Gonzaga as a whole. I'll say this quickly before we get into the 3-point shooting. Ben also 14th all-time in WCC history in games played, 141 games played at Gonzaga. Only 39 starts, but still a top 15 player in terms of total games played during his Gonzaga basketball career, top 14 in the WCC. Looking at the 3-point shooting, like we said with Ben, 37.7% as a sophomore and as a junior. But in his senior year, that dropped to 27.1%. And really, that was because of a horrendous start to the season. Whether it was the jolt of not starting the season in the starting lineup, being replaced by Michael Ajayi, which I think, didn't work out. They have eventually quickly re-switched the starting lineup, had Michael come off the bench, had Ben start, and then they switched it again. They made multiple switches to that. Whether it was just him being cold to start the season, I'm not sure what it was, but in the first 16 games of Ben's final season in Spokane, he shot 6 of 34 from 3. That's 17.6%. However, in his final 19 games, so a little more than half the season, Ben shot 13 of 36, which is 36%. So still a little bit lower than his 37.7%. But for a little more than half the year, he kind of looked pretty similar to that three-point shooter that we saw him be his 2 previous seasons in Spokane. But that first part of the season, the non-conference slate, was just abhorrently bad shooting from not only Ben, but Braden. Huff didn't shoot it well kind of throughout the season, but definitely not at the beginning. Michael Ejim, same thing. He didn't shoot it well throughout the season. Like the Gonzaga's bigs really struggled to space the floor last year. Graham Ike is a decent three-point shooter, but a low volume one. And Gonzaga needed one of Ben or Michael to be a better three-point shooter to space the floor, to give more room to Graham and Braden down low. And Ben was expected to fill that role. And it's unfortunate that in his final year at Gonzaga, as a player that has so much reverence and so much kind of love for the program and love from the fan base, that one of the main things he was kind of expected to deliver as a senior, unfortunately didn't come to fruition, especially early in the year. And I think it was a pretty big killer for the Zags this season. Again, we've talked about this. Gonzaga's three-point shooting last year as a team was the worst three-point shooting team that Mark Few has ever coached. I was going to say at Gonzaga, but period. At the Division I level, this is the worst three-point shooting team Gonzaga's had in Mark Few's tenure. And again, very little of that overall blame falls on Ben Gregg, but he was one of the notable players who was expected to shoot better from three than he did. And his lack of floor spacing last year, I think, was a problem for Gonzaga in a pretty significant way in terms of how defenses were able to handle this team and handle Graham and do things. I think Gonzaga's main issues last year were on the defensive end. The offense wasn't exactly a problem, but the three-point shooting was an issue, and it was unfortunate that Ben was wrapped up in that, coming off of what has ultimately been a tremendous, fantastic, fun-to-watch career as a Gonzaga Bulldog. So what does that mean for Ben's future? And what does it mean for how Gonzaga is going to replace Ben Gregg on the roster in the 25-26 season? We're going to talk about both those things and more coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting super easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can continue to combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Odds are already out for the 2026 National Championship. Gonzaga right now at plus 3,500 to take it home in 2026. If you're feeling extra confident, then don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still going through our Ben Gregg season in review episode. We've done these already for the transfers out, Jun Sukyo, Michael Ejim, Dusty Stromer. We've done them for Nolan Hickman as well. We did one for Caliph Battle. Now we're talking about one of the other graduating players here in Ben Gregg. Out of eligibility after 5 straight years with Gonzaga, I think because of that weird extra COVID year and everything, I think there were some folks who, I remember a lot over the offseason coming into the season when I laid out the scholarship chart and pointed out, like, this is Ben's last year. A lot of people said, no, Ben's got more after this. I think we all wanted Ben to have more time at Gonzaga, and especially because he was a reserve for so long. It was like, no, he's got a couple years to blossom still. And it's like, no, this was unfortunately it for Ben Gregg. And again, we saw some really good stuff from him this year, but the steady growth year over year kind of, I don't want to say it's stalled out, because I think he showed some improvement in a lot of ways this most recent season. Better offensive rebounder, more efficient scorer, but the numbers were basically the same from his junior season to his senior year. And now we kind of look at what's next for Ben Gregg. And I think the hope was that a lot of these players who are older guys for Gonzaga would do something during the season that could make them indispensable from an NBA draft perspective. Because older prospects, it's very, very difficult to get attention if you're a graduating senior from the NBA. And unfortunately, Ben didn't really do enough to help his what was already probably somewhat limited chances of becoming an NBA player. Ben is small for a big, like he's 6'8", 6'9", maybe. So I don't see him being like a small ball 5, small ball 4 in the NBA, unless he could be counted on as like an elite floor spacing big. And he's just not that. He, again, if he shot 37% again for a third year in a row, then I think you start to get at least a little bit of attention of like, hey, maybe this is a guy who could, give us a few minutes off the bench as a floor spacing big type of thing. But unfortunately, at this point, his age as an older prospect, his size as a guy who'd be smaller than a lot of wings in the NBA, and the inconsistent outside shooting are going to be negatives. I think he's a better three-point shooter than the 27% he shot last year. But again, even if he's a 36, 37% shooter in college, is that good enough to make the NBA? Ben Gregg drew a lot of kind of Killian Tilly comparisons for the skill sets that they have. Killian Tilly, a guy who just sniffed the NBA. He played, but he did not get a ton of run. Injuries obviously played a huge part in Killian Tilly's story, whereas they don't with Ben. But here's the deal. Killian Tilly shot over 40% from three all 4 years that he was at Gonzaga, every single season. Ben never touched 40%. He was 37.5% 2 years in a row. That was it. So I don't see it for Ben, unfortunately. I think he's got a chance to have a very lucrative and productive professional basketball playing career. It's just not going to happen in the NBA. It could happen in the G League, although we could have a longer debate about whether that would be lucrative, as the G League doesn't pay perhaps as well as some other leagues. But overseas, there's big money to be made. There's fantastic places to play. We've seen so many great Gonzaga players have prolific professional careers overseas. That'll be a fun offseason topic, as it is every year. But like Kevin Pangos is still playing. Kyle Wiltshire is still playing. There are many, many others. Filip Petrusev still playing. Killian Tilly now playing professionally overseas. Joel Ayayi playing professionally overseas. The list goes on and on and on. And if that's a decision that Ben wants to make, if he wants to go if he wants to go play overseas in the EuroLeague or in another top league, I think he will definitely get that attention. He fits the kind of rugged style that they love out of their Euro bigs. He can also space the floor, step out. Like, I think there's a real chance that Ben ends up having a productive professional basketball career outside of the United States, again, if he wants to do that. And in terms of Ben Gregg's legacy, he's kind of the quintessential Zag. Like, he's kind of the perfect Zag. And we talked about this with Anton Watson a little bit as well, of like a homegrown kid. In Watson's case, very homegrown, literally from Spokane. In Ben's case, from nearby. Grew up Gonzaga fans, committed to the program, waited their time, filled their role when they were asked to fill their role, when they were given the opportunity to play more minutes, took advantage of that opportunity. Like, Ben hits every part of that. He always wanted to play at Gonzaga. He made it clear immediately, I want to be here. I want to play in this program. He never entered the transfer portal. He never seemingly considered leaving. He was on the bench in a small role for a few years, waited it out. When given the opportunity to play big minutes in that game against Purdue, he took advantage. He forced the coaching staff to play him more minutes. He said, look, I deserve to be out there. I'm doing the things you asked me to do. I'm diving on the floor. I'm hitting open shots. I'm defending my butt off, even against a guy who's almost a foot taller than me in Zach Edey. And again, credit where credit is due to Mark Few and the staff for saying, yeah, this kid deserves it. He earned it. We're going to give him that opportunity to continue to play. We saw that in that season, when he was a sophomore against Purdue. We saw it when they gave him an opportunity to start and replace Dusty Stromer in the lineup against San Diego. Not this past season, but the year before that. He had 23 points and then started the rest of the season. We saw that this last year when Michael Ajayi was really struggling. Ben kind of stepped up and played better in the second half of the year. We've seen Ben continually be somebody who steps up when needed and fills the role that is asked of him. And that just is a hallmark of Mark Few's kind of Gonzaga team and Gonzaga program. And it was great to see Ben fill that role and do what needed to be done. And it makes him such a fun and easy player to root for. It's the reason, a little free pub for them. It's the reason Varsity Icons, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding it up, started with Ben Gregg. Like, it's the reason that the first figurines that they made for Gonzaga were Ben Gregg, because they knew he's the kind of player that fans love. He's the kind of player that people want to root for. He's so easy to root for, and he's so charitable. I don't want to get through this show without talking about this. Ben Gregg was incredibly charitable with his NIL money. He used it to raise funds for homeless people in Spokane. He worked with Rick Clark, a former Gonzaga student who is very known in the community for creating backpacks that have like supplies for homeless people in the community. Ben worked with him to help do that. He handed out sandwiches and drinks for homeless people during the winter. Like, he's one of the most charitable people that Gonzaga's had on the roster. I know that Rasir Bolton won awards for his charitable donations during his time at Gonzaga, and so did Ben Gregg. Like, both these guys were honored for how much they helped out the community in Spokane. I just think that's such an incredibly cool thing. On top of everything else that made Ben such a perfect Zag, that part of it, I think, is a huge part of his legacy in the city of Spokane and as a Gonzaga basketball player as well. In terms of how Gonzaga will replace Ben Gregg, we haven't really seen them be particularly active in this space. Gonzaga's targeting in the transfer portal up to this point, the players that they have publicly reached out to, that we know they have contacted, are pretty much all shooting guards. Been a couple point guards like Donovan Dent, who they went after, Nate George from Georgia Tech, who went to Syracuse. But most of the players they've gone after are wings, guard wings, guys like Rodney Rice or Tanner Toolson or Isaiah Pasha or Brennan Howson or Dan Skillings, like all those players that Gonzaga has been known to have contacted in the transfer portal. The vast majority of them are 2s or 3s. We haven't really seen them prioritize the front court. What we do know is that assuming nothing funky happens in the next week with Braden Huff and Graham Ike, assuming they both return, Graham Ike will start at the 5, Braden Huff will start at the 4. The last 3 games of the season, that was the starting lineup. I don't expect anything to be different in that regard. I expect those 2 guys to start. But your only backup big right now is Ismaila Diani, and he's pretty clearly a 5. He's not a 4. So you have 3 centers. And I think Braden Huff can play the 4, obviously. That is why they have him penciled in as the starting power forward. But you need depth at that position desperately, because Ben Gregg is gone, of course, and also Michael Ajayi is gone. I don't think Jalen Warley is being ID'd as a power forward because he is a playmaking wing. He's 6'7", so he's big enough, but that's not really the role that I think Gonzaga has ID'd for him. So they need help at the power forward position, and they're going to get it. But it's pretty clear right now the staff is not prioritizing the front court. They are prioritizing filling a need at the 2 because Nolan Hickman and Caleb Battle and Dusty Stromer are all gone. And then I think they're going to turn around and prioritize adding some depth to the front court. That's just my read based on how the transfer portal has gone so far for Mark Few and the Zags. But I would be shocked if they didn't make at least some kind of addition there. Even if Ike and Huff both come back, they're going to need more help in the front court. We just haven't heard a whole lot of players at that position who have been really targeted by the Zags as of yet. But again, it's still pretty early. We're going to have some more names to talk about in the coming weeks, maybe even coming months here on Locked On Zags as Mark Few looks to fill out this roster for next season. Well, folks, Gonzaga's all-time leading scorer, Yvonne Ejim, was selected in the 3rd round of the WNBA draft by the Indiana Fever on Monday. We're going to talk more about that coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Closing out the show, talking about the WNBA draft, which took place on Monday evening, 4:30 Pacific time, 7:30 Eastern time. And we saw Yvonne Ejim get selected. 3rd round, 33rd overall. She becomes the 3rd draft pick from the Indiana Fever, Caitlin Clark's team. So we're going to talk about that. She becomes the 9th Zag ever in program history to be selected in the WNBA draft. 9 players have been selected. Only 2 have ever played even a single game in the WNBA. Interestingly, it is the highest drafted player in Gonzaga basketball history. That part's not surprising. And the lowest drafted player in Gonzaga basketball history are the 2 who have actually stepped foot on a WNBA court in a game. That would be, of course, Courtney Vandersloot, who was selected 3rd overall, I think back in 2011 in that draft. Of course, she's been a 5-time WNBA All-Star, 2-time national champion, 2nd all-time in assists, now back with the Chicago Sky. The other one being Caitlin Redmond, who was there around the same time as Courtney. I think she was drafted in 2013. She was the 3rd round pick, 36th overall in that draft, played a handful of games with the New York Liberty. That's it, but still got into the WNBA. Meanwhile, 7 other players have been selected in the WNBA draft, but failed to actually play in a game. A couple of them happened last year. Brenna Maxwell and Kaylin Trung, both selected in the 2nd round of the WNBA draft. Also, Kayla Standish, selected in the 2nd round of the WNBA draft about a decade ago. None of those 3 have actually played in a WNBA game. It's unfortunate. Brenna Maxwell was the first pick of the 2nd round, 13th overall player selected, and did not actually make the roster. These are things that are hopefully going to change with the expansion. The Golden State Valkyries added this year. Portland team will be added next year. Toronto coming soon. When there are more teams in the WNBA, we will see less players getting selected in the second round and not even making rosters. For Gonzaga, Hayden Palmer, Jill Barta, Vivian Frazen, and of course, Yvonne Ejim all have been selected in the third round and to date have yet to play in the WNBA. But Yvonne is going to hopefully be somebody who can break that trend and be the first Zag to make a WNBA debut since Red about a year ago. Again, one of 3 picks for Indiana outside Michaela Timpson from Florida State and Bree Hall from South Carolina. If she makes the roster, not only would she be on an Indiana Fever team with Caitlin Clark, she would also be teammates with Lexi Hull. Lexi Hull is a Spokane native who went to Stanford, had a very decorated career at Stanford, won championship, has been a very quality bench piece for Indiana since being selected 6th overall, I think 4 seasons ago. So it'd be cool to have Spokane represented by multiple different players on the Indiana Fever if Yvonne were to make the roster. She leaves Gonzaga with an incredibly decorated career, first in school history in total points scored, 2,385. She passed Drew Timme during the WCC tournament this year. First in rebounds, field goals, and double-doubles in women's basketball history. First women's player in WCC history with 2,000-plus points and 1,000-plus rebounds. She was 2-time WCC Player of the Year, 2-time WCC Defensive Player of the Year, 2-time Becky Hammond Mid-Major Player of the Year award winner. Just she's an Olympian in 2024 with Team Canada. Just an incredibly decorated career. One of the best of all time to wear a Gonzaga uniform. I am rooting so hard for her to find a way to use her skill as a low post scorer, as an effective finisher, as somebody that you can get the ball on the high post and let her operate. She can pass, she can score, she can put the ball on the deck. I think the skills that she possesses absolutely translate to the WNBA. I think there's concern that her size maybe won't play as well in the WNBA as it does in the WCC. That is a reasonable concern to have, but I'm very excited to see how she's able to do with training camp starting here in just about a week or so. Before we move on to Bree Salenbien in the transfer portal, also want to shout out Haley Van Lith, who is not only a native of Wenatchee, Washington. She is also currently dating former Gonzaga guard Jalen Suggs. They were on TV during the WNBA draft. If you didn't see that, it was kind of fun to see Jalen out there rooting for her. It was also fun to see him rooting for her during the NCAA tournament as well. Miss March, as they call Haley Van Lith, for taking for going to the Sweet 16 5 straight times, for being the Elite Eight with 3 different teams. Tremendous career for her in college. And now she joins the Chicago Sky. So the Chicago Sky will have 2 point guards who both went to high school in the state of Washington, who both have Gonzaga connections, admittedly very different. Courtney was one of the greatest players in Gonzaga basketball history. Haley just happens to be dating one of the greatest one-season players in Gonzaga basketball history, but excited to see Sloot and Van Lith team up together. Cool moment for high school basketball in the state of Washington. Last note here, Bree Salenbien, who had her best season in a Gonzaga basketball uniform this past year. She hit the transfer portal. We talked about that a few weeks ago. She has now found her new home at Ball State, located in Muncie, Indiana, which is about 3 hours away from her hometown of Adrian, Michigan. So she's going back closer to home for her final year of eligibility. Salenbien spent 4 years at Gonzaga, but only played in 62 games. Injuries just ravaged what was an incredibly promising career, and not a bad career that she ultimately ended up having. Just didn't reach the threshold that I think she was the highest rated recruit in Gonzaga basketball history prior to landing in Spokane. But unfortunately, just a series of knee injuries. She missed an entire season in 22-23. She only played 12 games the next year. This past year, she only played 21 games. She'd actually thought about retiring after last season, but decided to come back for this 24-25 season. I'm glad she did. I'm sure she's glad she did too, because she put up career numbers. She played 21 games, started 2 of them, averaged 18 minutes a game, 6.5 points, 3 boards, 1.5 assists. The best season of her career. And now she gets another year to play closer to home in a different conference at Ball State. Hopefully she'll be able to find some success and really have a great final season playing college basketball. We could have really used her staying at Gonzaga for another year, just with Yvonne and Maud Hybens and Esther Little already out the door for graduation, Taylor Dalton as well. But you can't fault somebody for wanting to go home and play closer to their family for their final year. So hats off to Bree and a good luck to her. Also mentioned Claire O'Connor is currently in the transfer portal. Another guard departure for Lisa Fortier's team. She averaged 7.5 points, 3.5 boards last year in 34 games, started 29 of them, also shot 41% from three. So that is a tough loss. We'll see if the Bellevue native ends up closer to home, perhaps at UW, or where she might end up. But another tough loss for Lisa Fortier's team. No transfers in yet for Gonzaga, but we'll keep an eye on that and keep you posted on the women's team as well. That's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We'll be back a couple more shows this week. We'll keep you up to date on what's going on the transfer portal, men's side and women's side. Keep going on these season review episodes as well. Thanks again, folks. And have a fantastic rest of your day. And as always, go Zags.